Rebecca opened her eyes as the morning light filtered through the blinds. Today was her 35th birthday, and despite the growing distance between her and James over the past year, she felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps today they would find their way back to each other. She rolled over and touched the empty space beside her. James had already left for work, but he promised to meet her for dinner at La Belle, the fancy restaurant downtown where they'd celebrated their first anniversary. Rebecca smiled at the memory of how they'd barely made it home that night, tearing at each other's clothes in the taxi. In the shower, Rebecca let the hot water cascade over her body, her hands tracing the curves that James once couldn't keep his hands off. When had he stopped looking at her that way? When had his kisses become quick pecks instead of the passionate embraces that used to leave her breathless? Throughout the day, Rebecca prepared herself with care. She got her hair done at the salon, opted for a manicure in James's favorite shade of red, and bought a new dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. The black silk clung to her hips and dipped low enough in front to show just the right amount of cleavage. James had always loved her in black. By 6 o'clock, Rebecca was ready. She spritzed on the perfume James had given her last Christmas and took one final look in the mirror. Not bad for 35, she thought, turning to admire how the dress showcased her toned back, the result of all those yoga classes James never noticed she was taking. The taxi dropped her at La Belle at exactly 7. Rebecca stepped into the warm glow of the restaurant, her heart beating faster. The maitre d' led her to their reserved table, and she ordered a glass of champagne while she waited. One glass turned into two. 7:30 came and went. At 8, Rebecca called James's cell. It went straight to voicemail. She texted him, trying to keep her message light. "The champagne is chilling, but it's getting lonely without you. Where are you?" By 9, the sympathetic glances from the waitstaff had become unbearable. Rebecca paid for her drinks and left, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and the first stirrings of anger. The apartment was dark when she returned. No James. No birthday cake. No presents. Nothing but the crushing silence of being forgotten. Rebecca kicked off her heels and poured herself a generous glass of wine. She was about to call Lisa, her best friend, when she noticed the note on the kitchen counter. James's messy handwriting was instantly recognizable. "Rebecca, had to help Olivia with an emergency at work. Don't wait up. Sorry about dinner. We'll reschedule. J. Olivia." Of course it was Olivia. The pretty new account manager with her perfect hair and her habit of touching James' arm when she laughed at his jokes. Rebecca had seen the way they looked at each other during the company Christmas party. She told herself she was imagining things. With trembling hands, Rebecca reached for her phone and opened Instagram. She didn't have to scroll far. There it was, a story posted by Mark from accounting just 30 minutes ago. In the background of his cocktail selfie were James and Olivia, sitting close together at a bar downtown, his hand resting possessively on her thigh. The phone slipped from Rebecca's fingers as the room began to spin. Not just an affair, a public affair. And on her birthday. She sank to the kitchen floor, the silk dress pooling around her like spilled ink. The tears came then, hot and angry, as Rebecca faced the truth. The man who had promised to love her forever had chosen another woman on the day he was supposed to celebrate her. In the quiet apartment as midnight approached, Rebecca's sadness hardened into resolve. This birthday marked not just the passing of another year, but the death of her marriage, and perhaps, though she couldn't see it yet, the birth of something new. The next morning, Rebecca woke with swollen eyes and a pounding headache. She reached for her phone to check the time and saw 3 missed calls from James. No messages, no explanation. She tossed the phone aside and pulled the covers over her head. Around noon, she heard the front door open and close. Footsteps approached the bedroom. Rebecca sat up, her heart racing despite her resolve to stay calm. James stood in the doorway, his hair messy and his clothes wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept. Good, Rebecca thought. "I'm sorry about last night," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I should have called." Rebecca laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even her. "You should have called. That's what you're sorry for. Not that you were with her on my birthday?" James sighed and sat on the edge of the bed. Rebecca moved away from him, pulling the blanket around her like armor. "I didn't plan for it to happen this way," James said, running his hands through his hair. "Olivia and I, It just happened. Nothing just happens, James. Rebecca's voice was steady despite the storm inside her. You made choices. Every time you texted her, every time you stayed late at work, every time you lied to me. Those were all choices. James looked at her then, his blue eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something else, relief. Like he was glad the secret was finally out. I love her, he said simply. I didn't mean to, but I do. The words cut through Rebecca like glass. She had expected denials, excuses about it being just physical, promises that it meant nothing. But love? That was different. That was worse. How long? She asked, needing to know but dreading the answer. 6 months, he admitted. It started at the conference in Chicago. Rebecca's mind raced back to that time. 6 months ago, she had been planning their summer vacation, thinking about starting a family. All while he was falling in love with someone else. I want a separation, James said. I need time to figure things out. Figure things out? Rebecca repeated. Seems to me you've already figured things out. You chose her. On my birthday. James had the decency to look ashamed. The timing was terrible. I know that. Get out, Rebecca said quietly. Pack what you need and get out. I can't look at you right now. To his credit, James didn't argue. He gathered some clothes and toiletries and left without another word. The sound of the door closing behind him was like a period at the end of a sentence, final and definitive. Rebecca spent the next week in a haze, going through the motions at work, ignoring concerned calls from friends. At night she lay awake in their bed, breathing in the fading scent of James's cologne on his pillow, hating herself for missing him despite everything. On Friday, Lisa showed up at her door with wine and takeout. Enough moping, she announced, pushing past Rebecca into the apartment. We're going to eat, drink, and then you're going to tell me everything. After 2 glasses of wine, Rebecca found herself telling Lisa about the night of her birthday, about James's confession, about the humiliation of being left for another woman so publicly. Men are idiots, Lisa declared, refilling their glasses. But you know what? This could be the best thing that ever happened to you. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Being humiliated on my birthday is the best thing ever? No, Lisa said, leaning forward. Being free from a man who doesn't appreciate you is. Think about it, Beck. When was the last time James made you truly happy? When was the last time he looked at you the way he used to? Rebecca couldn't remember. The realization hit her like a wave. Her marriage had been dying long before James met Olivia. Later that night after Lisa left, Rebecca stood in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at herself for the first time in months. She noticed the sadness in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. James's betrayal had broken her heart, but it had also broken the spell. The illusion of their perfect marriage was gone, and in its place was an uncomfortable truth. She deserved more than what James had been giving her. Rebecca touched her reflection in the mirror, tracing the outline of her face. Time to wake up, she whispered to herself. 3 months after James moved out, Rebecca felt like she was finally getting her life back. She threw herself into her work at the publishing house, earned praise for editing a difficult manuscript, and even started going to the gym again. The divorce papers sat unsigned on her desk, a task she couldn't quite bring herself to complete. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Rebecca hurried into her favorite coffee shop to escape the downpour. She ordered her usual, a large latte with an extra shot, and turned to find a seat, shaking raindrops from her hair. Rebecca, is that you? She looked up, startled to hear her name. A tall man with warm brown eyes and a friendly smile stood before her. It took her a moment to place him. Thomas Walker. She couldn't believe it. The last time she'd seen him was 3 years ago when she'd edited his first novel. What are you doing here? I thought you were living in Italy. Thomas's smile widened. I moved back last month, finished my second book and decided I missed home. He gestured to an empty table. Would you like to join me? Unless you're in a hurry. Rebecca hesitated. She wasn't in the habit of sitting with men in coffee shops anymore, but Thomas wasn't just any man. He was a client and now, technically, a friend. I'd love to, she said, surprised to find she meant it. They talked easily the way old friends do. Thomas told her about living in a small Italian village, the characters he'd met, the food he'd eaten. Rebecca found herself laughing at his stories, feeling lighter than she had in months. So how's life treating you? he asked, his eyes warm on her face. Rebecca hesitated. It's complicated, she finally said. I'm getting divorced. Thomas's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be, Rebecca said, surprised at the strength in her voice. It's for the best. I just didn't see it until it was over. Thomas nodded, not pushing for details, and Rebecca was grateful. Instead, he told her more about his new book, a romance set in the Italian countryside. As he described the plot, Rebecca found herself captivated not just by the story, but by the way he told it, his hands moving expressively, his eyes lighting up with passion. When was the last time James had looked that alive talking about anything? They stayed until the coffee shop closed, their conversation flowing from books to travel to the best pizza in the city. As they walked out together, Thomas hesitated under the awning. I know this might be bad timing, he said, but I'd love to see you again. Maybe dinner? Or we could just grab coffee if that's more comfortable. Rebecca looked up at him, at his hopeful expression, and felt a flutter in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Thomas wasn't James. He wasn't trying to replace what she had lost. He was something entirely new. Dinner would be nice, she said. On Friday night, Rebecca spent more time than she wanted to admit choosing what to wear. She finally settled on a deep blue dress that made her eyes stand out. It wasn't as revealing as the black one she'd worn on her birthday, but it made her feel confident in a different way. Thomas picked her up at 7, and Rebecca felt a pleasant shock when she opened the door. He looked even better than she remembered, in dark jeans and a charcoal blazer that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. You look beautiful, he said, his voice sincere. At the restaurant, a small Italian place Thomas knew from his time abroad, they were seated at a cozy corner table. The lighting was dim, the wine was excellent, and Rebecca found herself opening up about her marriage in a way she hadn't even with Lisa. He was with her on my birthday, she admitted after her second glass of wine. Left me waiting at the restaurant. Thomas's face darkened. What kind of man does that? The kind I married, apparently. Rebecca gave a sad smile. His loss, Thomas said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. Definitely his loss. The way he looked at her then, like she was something precious, made Rebecca's breath catch. She couldn't remember the last time James had looked at her that way, with genuine appreciation, not just habit or obligation. When Thomas walked her to her door later that night, there was a moment of tension. The kind that buzzes with possibility. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. Instead, Rebecca closed the distance between them. His lips were soft, the kiss gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Her body came alive under his touch, reminding her of sensations she'd nearly forgotten. I should go, Thomas whispered against her lips. But I'd like to see you again. Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy. I'd like that too. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca and Thomas fell into an easy rhythm. They met for dinner twice a week, went for walks in the park on Sundays, and texted throughout the day. Rebecca found herself smiling at her phone more often, something her coworkers noticed and commented on. You seem different, her assistant Megan said one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly schedule. Happier. Rebecca just smiled, not quite ready to share her new relationship with the world. It felt fragile still, like a delicate plant that needed protection to grow. One evening, Thomas invited Rebecca to his apartment for the first time. I'll cook for you, he promised. My grandmother's famous pasta recipe. Rebecca felt a flutter of nervousness as she knocked on his door. This felt like crossing a threshold, both literally and figuratively. Thomas opened the door wearing an apron over his shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms dusted with dark hair. Hi, he said, his smile warm. Come in. His apartment was exactly what she'd expected. Bookshelves lining the walls, a comfortable couch with well-worn cushions, and a small dining table set for two with candles and wine glasses. It felt like him, unpretentious but thoughtful. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. It smells amazing, Rebecca said, accepting the glass of red wine he offered. I hope it tastes as good as it smells, Thomas replied. I haven't made this in a while. They ate at his small table, their knees occasionally touching underneath. The pasta was delicious, the conversation easy. Rebecca felt more comfortable with Thomas than she had with anyone in a long time. After dinner, they moved to his couch with the rest of the wine. Thomas put on some soft music, and Rebecca found herself relaxing against him, her head on his shoulder. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, his voice rumbling under her ear. "I know you're still working through a lot with the divorce, and I don't want to rush you. But I want you to know that I'm serious about this. About us." Rebecca sat up to look at him. "I'm serious too," she said quietly. "You've made these past few weeks bearable. More than bearable." Thomas reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You're remarkable, you know that? After everything you've been through, you're still so open, so willing to try again." His words touched something deep inside her. Rebecca leaned forward and kissed him, no longer hesitant or uncertain. Thomas responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her closer. Their kisses grew deeper, more urgent. Thomas's hands moved down her back, slipping under the hem of her blouse to touch her bare skin. Rebecca shivered at the contact. "Is this okay?" he whispered against her neck. "Yes," she breathed. "More than okay." Thomas stood, pulling her up with him. "Bedroom?" he asked, his eyes dark with desire. Rebecca nodded, letting him lead her down the hallway. His bedroom was simple, a large bed with a dark blue comforter, more bookshelves, a dresser. But she barely had time to notice the details before Thomas was kissing her again, walking her backward until her legs hit the edge of the bed. They undressed each other slowly, taking time to explore newly revealed skin. Rebecca felt a moment of self-consciousness. It had been months since anyone had seen her naked, and even longer since anyone had looked at her with such open desire. But Thomas made her feel beautiful, his hands and mouth reverent on her body. "You're stunning," he murmured against her collarbone, his breath hot on her skin. When they finally came together, Rebecca felt something break open inside her. This wasn't just physical pleasure, it was connection, genuine and deep. Thomas moved with her, his eyes never leaving hers, and Rebecca felt truly seen for the first time in years. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Rebecca's head on Thomas's chest, his heartbeat strong under her ear. He traced lazy patterns on her back, occasionally pressing kisses to her forehead. "Stay the night?" he asked softly. Rebecca hesitated. She hadn't spent the night with anyone but James in over 7 years. It felt like another line to cross. Thomas seemed to sense her uncertainty. "You can say no. I'll understand." His consideration made the decision easy. "I want to stay," she said. As they drifted toward sleep, Rebecca realized that this night marked another kind of beginning. With James, she had felt like she was constantly trying to recapture something from their past. With Thomas, everything felt new, full of potential rather than regret. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. "For what?" he asked sleepily. "For reminding me what it feels like to be wanted." Thomas pulled her closer. "Always," he murmured into her hair. "Always." Rebecca signed the last of the divorce papers and handed them to her lawyer. 5 months had passed since that awful birthday night. 5 months of rebuilding her life, piece by piece. 5 months of discovering who she was without James, and 5 months of growing closer to Thomas. "That's it," her lawyer said with a professional smile. "We'll file these today. It should be finalized within a month." Walking out of the lawyer's office, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in years. That evening, she and Thomas celebrated with champagne on his balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "To new beginnings," Thomas said, clinking his glass against hers. Rebecca smiled, leaning into him. "To new beginnings." Later that night, tangled in his sheets, Rebecca told Thomas she loved him for the first time. The words came easily, naturally, like they'd been waiting inside her all along. Thomas's face lit up, and he kissed her deeply before whispering the words back to her. The next morning, Rebecca hummed as she made coffee in her kitchen. She had the day off and planned to do some reading before meeting Thomas for dinner. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, interrupting her peaceful morning. When she opened the door, her heart nearly stopped. James stood there, looking thinner than she remembered, his blue eyes tired but determined. "Rebecca," he said, his voice achingly familiar. "Can I come in, please?" She wanted to say no, to shut the door in his face, but curiosity won out, and she stepped aside to let him enter the apartment they once shared. "What do you want, James?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. He ran a hand through his hair. a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "I've made a terrible mistake," he said. "I miss you. I miss us." Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. "You miss us? After what you did?" "Olivia and I broke up," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "It wasn't what I thought it would be. Nothing compares to what we had." "What we had," Rebecca repeated, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Do you even remember what we had, James? Because I do. I remember waiting alone at that restaurant on my birthday while you were with her." James winced. "I know I hurt you. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. We have history, Rebecca. 7 years together. That means something." Rebecca felt a strange calm settle over her. 6 months ago, these words would have meant everything to her. Now they felt hollow. "History isn't enough, James. We could try counseling," he pressed, taking a step toward her. "Start over. I know you haven't been seeing anyone. Lisa told me." Rebecca made a mental note to have a word with Lisa about boundaries. "Actually, I have been seeing someone." James's face fell. "Oh, is it serious?" "Yes," Rebecca said, surprised at how good it felt to say it out loud. "It is. More serious than 7 years of marriage, than the life we built together." Rebecca thought about Thomas, his kindness, his patience, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. "We didn't build much of a life together, did we?" she said softly. "Not at the end." James moved closer, his familiar cologne bringing back memories she thought she'd forgotten. "We could build something new. Better than before. I know I made a mistake with Olivia, but she meant nothing to me, not really. It was just a distraction. A distraction that lasted 6 months, that you chose over me on my birthday." James reached for her hand. To her surprise, she let him take it. His palm was warm against hers, familiar yet strange now. "I never stopped loving you," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, Rebecca, give me another chance." For a brief, disorienting moment, Rebecca felt herself wavering. This was James, her husband, the man she'd once thought she'd grow old with. The safety of the familiar pulled at her. Then she thought of Thomas waiting for her at the restaurant they'd chosen for tonight. Thomas, who had never made her question her worth, who had never made her wait alone on her birthday. "I signed the divorce papers today," she said, pulling her hand away gently but firmly. "It's over, James." "Is that what you really want?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Rebecca looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something important. The pain was gone. She could look at James now and feel nothing but a gentle sadness for what might have been. "Yes," she said. "That's what I want." James nodded slowly, accepting her decision with a dignity she hadn't expected from him. "He's a lucky man," he said, "whoever he is." "No." Rebecca corrected him as she showed him to the door. "I'm the lucky one this time." Rebecca sat across from Thomas at her favorite restaurant, pushing pasta around her plate. She hadn't told him about James's visit yet, and the secret weighed on her like a stone. "You're quiet tonight," Thomas said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Everything okay?" Rebecca looked up into his warm brown eyes and knew she couldn't keep it from him. "James came to see me today," she said. Thomas's hand stilled on hers, but he didn't pull away. What did he want? To get back together. Rebecca watched Thomas's face carefully. He said he made a mistake. Thomas took a slow sip of his wine, his expression unreadable. "And what did you say?" "I told him no," Rebecca said simply. "I told him I signed the divorce papers and that I'm with you now." The tension in Thomas's shoulders eased slightly. Was it hard, saying no to him? Rebecca considered the question. "Less hard than I thought it would be," she admitted. "There was a moment, just a moment, when I remembered how it used to be with him. But then I remembered how it is with you." Thomas squeezed her hand. "I've been trying not to rush you. I know you've been through a lot. You've been perfect," Rebecca said. "More than I deserved after everything." "Hey," Thomas frowned, "don't say that. You didn't do anything wrong. James is the one who threw away something precious." Rebecca smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for this man who always seemed to know exactly what to say. "Can we get out of here?" she asked suddenly. "I'm not really hungry anymore." They walked hand in hand through the park, the summer evening warm around them. Fireflies blinked in the darkness, and somewhere distant, a street musician played a melancholy tune on a saxophone. "I'm scared," Rebecca admitted as they sat on a bench overlooking the pond. I thought I was done with James, really done. But seeing him today, it made things complicated again. In what way? Thomas asked quietly. Not in the way you're thinking, Rebecca hurried to explain. I don't want him back, but seeing him reminded me of how badly I got hurt, and, she hesitated, how much it would hurt to lose you too. Thomas turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Rebecca, I can't promise that I'll never hurt you. Nobody can promise that. But I can promise that I will never betray you the way he did. I will never choose anyone else over you. Rebecca searched his face in the dim light. How can you be so sure? James promised the same things once. Because I've seen what losing someone you love looks like, Thomas said softly. My father left my mother for another woman when I was 12. I saw what it did to her. I promised myself I would never be that kind of man. Rebecca hadn't known this about him. You never told me that. It's not something I talk about often, Thomas admitted. But I wanted you to know why this matters so much to me. Why you matter so much. Rebecca leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle press of lips that deepened as he pulled her closer. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I want to trust this, she whispered. I want to trust us. Then trust it, Thomas said. One day at a time. Back at his apartment, they made love with a new intensity, as if both were trying to prove something to themselves and each other. Rebecca gave herself over to the sensation of his hands on her body, his lips on her neck, the comforting weight of him above her. Afterward, as they lay tangled in his sheets, Rebecca thought about birthdays. Her last one had marked the end of her marriage. Her next one was just a week away. What are you thinking about? Thomas asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. My birthday is next Friday, she said. The big 3-6. Thomas propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. I know, he said with a small smile. I've been planning something. Nothing fancy, Rebecca said quickly. Last year was enough drama for a lifetime. Not fancy, Thomas promised, but special. You deserve special. Rebecca snuggled closer to him, breathing in his scent. Just being with you will be special enough. Thomas kissed the top of her head. You're easy to please. Not really, Rebecca said. I just know what matters now. As she drifted towards sleep in his arms, Rebecca thought about James again. Not with longing, but with a strange sort of gratitude. His betrayal had been painful, devastating even, but without it, she might never have found her way to Thomas. She might never have discovered her own strength. Sometimes, she realized, the worst moments of our lives can lead us exactly where we need to be. The morning of Rebecca's 36th birthday dawned clear and bright. She opened her eyes to find Thomas already awake, watching her with a tender expression. Happy birthday, he whispered, kissing her softly. Rebecca smiled against his lips. Thank you. You know what today is, don't you? Thomas asked, tracing the curve of her cheek with his finger. Friday? Rebecca teased, though she knew exactly what he meant. It's been exactly 1 year since everything changed, Thomas said. 1 year since your life took a turn you never expected. Rebecca nodded, surprised to find no pain in the memory. The best wrong turn I ever took. They spent a lazy morning in bed, Thomas bringing her coffee and croissants from her favorite bakery. He wouldn't tell her his plans for the day, only that she should wear comfortable shoes and casual clothes. Not the La Belle treatment then, Rebecca joked, referring to the restaurant where James had left her waiting a year ago. Thomas shook his head. Definitely not the La Belle treatment. He drove them out of the city, the windows down, music playing. Rebecca felt light, freer than she had in years. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, the papers arriving on a Tuesday morning like any other piece of mail. She had signed them, filed them away, and moved on. After an hour's drive, Thomas pulled up to a small beach. It wasn't fancy, no resort, no umbrella drinks, just a stretch of sand, blue water, and relative privacy. I thought we could spend the day just being, Thomas explained as he pulled a picnic basket from the trunk. No expectations, no fancy restaurants where you have to worry if I'll show up. Just us, the beach, good food, and maybe a sunset if we're lucky. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. It was so simple, yet so perfect. So different from the elaborate celebrations James had always insisted on, events that were more about appearances than actual joy. They spread a blanket on the sand and unpacked the basket. Wine, cheese, fruit, sandwiches, and a small birthday cake with a single candle. "I know it's not much," Thomas began, but Rebecca cut him off with a kiss. "It's everything," she said. "Exactly what I needed." They spent the day swimming, walking along the shore, talking about everything and nothing. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sand, Thomas took her hand and led her to the water's edge. "You know," he said, "when we first met at that coffee shop, I recognized you immediately. I remembered how brilliant you were with my first book, how you saw things in the story that even I hadn't realized were there." Rebecca smiled at the memory. "You were so nervous when we first met. You kept dropping your pen." "Because you were beautiful," Thomas admitted. "I had this huge crush on my editor, but it wasn't professional to say anything." "And then we met again," Rebecca said, squeezing his hand. "And then we met again," Thomas repeated. "When I saw you in that coffee shop, I thought the universe was giving me a second chance. Then you told me you were getting divorced, and I felt terrible for being happy about your pain." "I'm not in pain anymore," Rebecca said softly. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Thomas turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Rebecca," he said, his voice serious now, "this past year has been the best of my life. I know it started in a difficult place for you, but I want the years ahead to be better and better." Rebecca felt her heart skip as Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said quickly, seeing her eyes widen. "Not yet. I know it's too soon for that. But I am asking you to consider it as a possibility for our future." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring with a small sapphire that matched the color of the deepening sky. "It's a promise," Thomas explained. "A promise that I will always show up for you. That I will never leave you waiting. That your birthday will always be a day of joy, not pain." Rebecca looked at the ring, then at Thomas, then at the sunset blazing across the water. 1 year ago today, her world had fallen apart in a restaurant across from an empty chair. Now she stood on a beach with a man who had helped her put the pieces back together in a new and better pattern. "Yes," she said simply, holding out her hand. Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that tasted of salt and promise. As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, Rebecca knew with perfect certainty that sometimes endings were just beginnings in disguise. "Happy birthday, Rebecca," Thomas whispered against her lips. "The happiest," she agreed, and this time it was true.